Hey, Charger fans, welcome back to another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. Happy to be here on a Sunday afternoon for us, Monday morning when you're listening to this, hopefully. I got a fun episode talking some Chargers news. We finally got some. There was a little dead period there, but there has been some news. We'll talk about Denzel Perryman, talk about Trai Turner, and some other thoughts from Tom Telesco's press conference. So before we get there, Tyler, first and foremost, and Alex, we'll go to you next. Tyler, how you doing today?
I'm staring at my Zoom and seeing the bags under my eyes and realize I need to go to sleep. So that's how I feel. I feel fine, but I look like I should sleep.
There you go. Long weekend for you?
No, I don't have bags under my eyes. I'm old now.
Getting to that age, man. Alex, how you doing today, dude?
I'm doing pretty good. Everything's all right over here. I received an invitation to replace Embiid and Simmons in the All-Star game. So I will take the trip to Atlanta.
Oh man, the fact that they're even doing the All-Star game is just stupid to me. Like all the other sports, they all cancel their All-Star games. Like, what are you doing? Anyway, and especially in Atlanta. Anyway, so this is a football podcast and a Chargers podcast. So we'll start with Denzel Perryman. It did come out from Ian Rappaport that he is going to test free agency. He is going to see what his market is. They have not ruled out a return to the Chargers, and for what it's worth, he is commenting on his Instagram page to fans that he does want to stay with the Chargers. Obviously, that does not guarantee that he will be back for the Chargers. You know, we don't really know how he fits with the team, how he fits in the cap, and so I think it is possible that he does come back, but it is also possible that he leaves. So, Tyler, what was your reaction to seeing the news that Denzel Perryman is going to test the market?
Pretty much as expected. He was great as a rotational guy, but he could be paid like a sort of cheap starter somewhere else. Yeah. So it makes sense that, yeah, he wants to come back. He has come back before. They've extended him to an extension before, so this would not be uncommon or unheard of for him to come back. But if there's a team that wants to play him like a full-time guy, go for it. Otherwise, he shouldn't be a full-time guy on this roster, nor will he be. So about business as usual, honestly. This is about as expected for Perryman as it could have been.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you want him back if you can get him, right? I mean, I think Denzel was really great last year, just stopping the run on early downs. He was a lot better in coverage too, compared to some of his previous seasons. So if they could get him back for, a reasonable price that they agree on for that role, then I would like to have him back, but it's probably not going to be the $6 million that he was making. Because that when he signed that contract, he was basically a starting middle linebacker. So now, I really don't know what his market's going to be. There's probably a couple teams that could have some interest that are thin at linebacker. But to me, I just don't see a way where he gets the contract that he just had, which was like a 2-year, $12 million deal. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of teams that are actually interested in giving him 1-year deals based on the current market. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to have him back if he wants to be back for, I guess 3-4 million. That's probably what his role is on this team, is like a backup depth linebacker. But I would not hold it against him in the slightest if he goes to Washington or some place where he can be a starting linebacker.
Yeah, you mentioned the 1-year deal. I think he's a prime candidate for what people are kind of expecting for these veterans to take these 1-year deals and then hit the market again next year, taking kind of like a prove it deal. We obviously saw Leonard Floyd do that with the Rams last year, and it paid huge dividends for him, and he's probably going to make $40-50 million this year. And so I think Denzel, like, he's in a good spot. I think he could stay with the Chargers again, maybe do a 1-year deal, maybe do a 2-year deal, and stay in that 20 to 25 snaps a game role behind Drew Tranquill and Kenneth Murray. Hopefully those two are healthy and are the starters. But, he was really good last year. And there was a point in time when we were talking about him as the best linebacker on the team and as a must resign. And the play that he had against Mekhi Becton, man, when he just blew him up, I will never, ever forget that play, because it's one of the most outrageous things I've ever seen on a football field. And seeing this 5'10", 240-pound linebacker just blow up this 6'8", 360-pound tackle is something that I'll never see. So I would love for him to be back. I think he's a great mentor to have around. The problem for the Chargers and the linebacker position in general is that behind Kenneth Murray, you have Tranquill, who has a number of injuries in his history. You have Denzel Perryman, who has a number of injuries in his history. You have Kaiser White, who has a number of injuries in his history. And so it's like, who can you count on to stay healthy? Because last year, they were just cycling through. I mean, I would love to see any number of those guys to be able to stay healthy, but, can you count on, 3 of those players to play 15, 16 games? I just don't know if that's the case.
You shouldn't
Yeah.
really count on them to play that many games because we haven't been able to count on them to play
Yeah.
that many games. The Chargers, I think, benefited in at least 2 positions from having some good depth, 1 at tight end and 2 at linebacker. Granted, I think Tranquil and Murray is a little bit better than Perryman and Vigil, but having those guys behind them, I think allowed them to, carry the defense just a little bit longer and have some decent plays in there. And sometimes you just need those uncommon plays, like you said, blowing up Mekhi Becton. That's just what Perryman does. He's the guy that drops back and picks off Matt Ryan in the fourth quarter, targeting Julio Jones in center field. The guy who's, blitzing Tom Brady against the Buccaneers or causing the fumble in week 1 against the Bengals. Sometimes you just need those plays. And granted, I think Murray's a better linebacker, but Perryman just has, Murray's the more down-to-down consistent linebacker, especially hitting into year 2, I'd think. He's also shown that he can be healthy for a full season, which Perryman really hasn't. But Perryman just has those plays that Murray doesn't do yet. He doesn't do yet. And sometimes you just need that one turnover, that one big hit, rally the defense or something. There is a really good role for him on this team. And so I do think he can stick around. I do think he'll stay unless Staley just has some other vision, some other plan for it, and he just doesn't fit.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the Joe Mixon play, Joe Mixon who never fumbles.
Yeah.
I remember them saying over and over again on the CBS broadcast of that game. But I'd like to have Denzel back. I think he's a great rotational player to have. It's not super easy to replace him just in terms of like who's going to be a depth linebacker that's going to come in and have the effect on the run game he does, right? Maybe you could draft one later in the draft, but in year 1, are they going to have the impact that someone like Perriman has had, in all his years in the league? I don't know. They could also go out and I guess sign someone in free agency if they wanted, but I don't think it's super easy to replace him from a leadership standpoint or, some of the stuff he does on the field too.
Yeah, we were talking in our live show about the benefit for Justin Herbert having a veteran presence. And I think you can make a similar argument for Kenneth Murray, because Kenneth Murray, if he's going to continue to call plays, obviously that kind of remains to be seen to see what Staley wants to do. But, if Kenneth Murray can have that veteran presence, I'm going to feel a little more comfortable, whether that's Nick Vigil or Denzel Perryman. I think it would make a lot of sense. But Kaiser White and Drew Tranquil and Kenneth Murray, those 3 are all under contract. I would expect them to add at least 2 players, whether that's Vigil and Perryman or through the draft or somebody else in free agency. But the style of linebacker that Brandon Staley is going to be using, that to me is like the biggest question mark of projecting the roster, because they didn't have any linebackers on the Rams, man. Like the majority of the time they were playing with 6 defensive backs and 5-man fronts with 2 edge rushers. So it's a little hard for me to project, just how much Staley would value Denzel Perryman or Nick Vigil or adding someone in free agency, when we just didn't really see him last year use any linebackers outside of Micah Kaiser. And then Micah Kaiser got hurt and they just shifted towards, permanently playing in a dime package with 6 defensive backs. So it's going to be really interesting to see what he does and what kind of style he's looking for from the linebacker position.
When you were looking at the Rams defense, which I know you did a breakdown on, was there a player or a linebacker that was anything like what Perryman is? Or are they all worse?
Their linebacker core was honestly, it was a bunch of Nick Vigils. Like it was just a bunch of like decent, coverage guys that are not really doing a whole lot. Micah Kaiser, I feel like it would probably be the best of that bunch, but he's more of like a Kaiser White type of player who's not going to like, physically impose his will on a game.
Right.
So they've never, but the Broncos, I'd have to go back and look to see what they did. And obviously when he was with the Bears, they had Trevathan and Roquan Smith, and those 2, Danny Trevathan is very similar to Denzel Perryman. So it's going to be interesting to see what direction he takes this group in, because honestly, I have no idea what kind of role he would envision for Denzel Perryman, but I would still want him back just from, a veteran standpoint and being able to have that explosive playability like you mentioned earlier.
There's also another reason to consider someone like
this team.
Oh wow, we're way behind.
No, I was just gonna say, it's a reason to consider Perriman is, he's a tackling linebacker, and the Chargers don't have guys that could tackle.
Yeah.
They were pretty bad at last year. Michael Davis got better at tackling, and there were some players who made some improvements. But the fact that Denzel Perriman is just one of those guys that you can fit in there, and you can feel comfortable about him getting a stomp on first or second down on a running play. I do think that carries a lot of value.
Yeah, I think it does too. And this is part of the reason that we never really talked about Perryman in our free agent acquisitions or returning extensions and whatnot.
Yeah.
But this is a reason to take, as much as you want Joe Thuney, you might take a Feliciano because you need to pay some of these $3-4 million type kind of guys to fill out the rest of your roster. So, is Feliciano and Perryman better than Thuney? Not really, but like being able to afford some of these guys on the back end of your roster is still very important. So I could see, this kind of going like that.
Yeah, it's going to be, some picking and choosing and deciding which areas you want to sacrifice, because if Brandon Staley feels like he needs to have a better depth in the secondary, and he's okay with having 3 or 4 quality linebackers instead of 5 or 6, then that's going to be his decision, because I think a guy like BJ Bello will still be on the roster, like a special teams linebacker, which we've kind of seen with Nick DeZubnar and guys before him and similar in that role. And so it's going to be interesting to see what he does, whether he wants more secondary pieces who can play different roles. And if Derwin James is healthy, Derwin James can play a lot of linebacker and do a lot of different things and fill a lot of different roles. So it's going to be really interesting to see what he does with this linebacker position.
For sure. We're so off sync today. I don't know why.
It's all good, man. It's all good. So we're a little lagging connection, you guys. So we do apologize for that. But the other thing we wanted to talk about today is Trai Turner. We've kind of talked ad nauseum about, the reasons why the Chargers should move on from him. But today we wanted to focus more on like the Chargers plan to replace him. And Tyler just, mentioned a couple guys, Joe Thuney or Tooney, I don't know how to say it, and John Feliciano. Obviously, Gabe Jackson was just released. Richie Incognito was just released. There's going to be an oversaturation of veteran players on the market because all these teams are looking to cut space, and the guard position in general is just one that NFL teams don't value as much as offensive tackle or even center. So Alex, what do you make? You did the whole video, obviously, on Saturday. You covered a bunch of different topics, but what do you think the best approach is for the Chargers to fill Trai Turner's role on the team is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple routes you can go. I did the video on Trai Turner, and today on Boltbeat, I wrote kind of the 4 options that you have to replace Trai Turner, right? There's the high price free agent option. So that's someone like Joe Thuney, if they want to go in that direction. There's sort of the shorter term deal, but, still somewhat expensive guy. And I think that can be someone like Gabe Jackson, someone like John Feliciano, if they want to go in that way, where it's less than Joe Thuney, but probably in that $8 to $9 million range, right? The draft, that's obviously one of the ways that people are going to look. And you could have Elijah Vera Tucker, obviously Steven's draft crush and everyone's draft crush. And then you have Rashawn Slater, who you can, if he's somehow still on the board, you can put him on the inside. And then starting in the second round, you got a bunch of guys like Wyatt Davis, Trey Smith, that are in the second round. Banks, obviously Notre Dame, Telesco connection there. So there's a lot of options that they could go after, or they could go in-house. And I guess if you boost every other piece of the offensive line, right? Let's say they go sign a tackle and a guard or a tackle and a center, and then draft another guard on the left side. Maybe you put Colt Toner in. I don't know. I mean, that's just sort of an in-house option. He did play well enough last year. I don't know how he would last on 1,000 snaps yet until we see it.
Yeah.
But I think that that's maybe something that they end up considering. We'll see what's Staley and Frank Smith obviously think of Colt Toner's game by a certain point. But I think those are kind of your options. I think the one that I like a lot is going after someone like Gabe Jackson or John Feliciano and just slotting them in right there. They're on a 1 or 2 year deal, kind of based on the market, and you play out the years as they go by. So if Gabe Jackson has a bad year this year, maybe you could move on from him next year, or same thing with John Feliciano. So I don't think they're going to. I mean, I kind of want to go after Thuney. I don't know if they're going to go in that direction just because they have so many spots on this offensive line to fill that I don't think they're going to spend $15 million on one. But for me, I think the best option is probably like a Gabe Jackson type. Yeah.
I'll throw out a couple of names. Just why not? If we preach guard tackle flexibility when it comes to Slater or Vera Tucker, while these are much uglier and unfun names, Schofield and Fluker are both available, and they can both play guard and tackle, and they can play right guard and tackle. Is that the best option? Maybe not, but it is an option, and they were both Chargers before, and Tom Telesco has picked them or signed them before, so it's not like he hates them. So that is an option. I honestly would give Toner a shot. I do think at the end of the day, they're going to take a veteran. I don't think you can rely on Toner just yet, but I would give him a shot. He was their best interior offensive lineman last year. I'm granted in a small sample size, so why not give him a shot? That being said, we've watched, arguably Scott Quessenberry be their best interior offensive lineman, be their best lineman in that year before, and then he got no shot the next year. So did they do the same thing with Toner? I don't know, I guess. So I think it's a veteran option that they go with, like the names that you mentioned, but keep in mind some of the other guys too.
Yeah, that's a good call. Sure. And Cole Toner, I do think, that he does deserve a chance. And if he's the backup right guard or kind of that swing into your offensive lineman, I'm okay with that. I think he showed enough in terms of his ability to step in a bad situation and play well. And he played super well against the Broncos and Shelby Harris and that kind of defensive front, that kind of means a lot to me. And so the Chargers, like, I would love obviously to be able to say, yeah, like, go sign Trent Williams, go get Joe Thuney, go get all these guys. And that's just like not realistic. And I know people were kind of freaking out about Tom Telesco's comment of like, well, we're not an offensive line away from competing for a championship. And it's like, well, you are, but I get what you're saying because, you have the secondary to worry about. You have potentially a backup quarterback, you linebacker, like we were just talking about, an edge rusher. And so like they're going to have some starters that are going to be cheap on the offensive line, whether that's, like a Kelvin Beachum at left tackle or, somebody that I think would make a lot of sense for them is Matt Filer from Pittsburgh. A lot of us have talked about Alejandro Villanueva and his connection, but, Matt Filer obviously has another connection and he does have that guard tackle flexibility. He's made a bunch of starts at right tackle and a bunch at left guard. So, he wouldn't cost as much and it would make a lot of sense, but for those same reasons, it would make a lot of sense for the Steelers to re-sign him. And so, you look at somebody like a Senio Clemente. I don't even know much about him, but he's made starts at guard and tackle and center, and he's played across these different positions. And so they're going to have a cheap starter, whether that's a rookie and then a cheap veteran, like it's going to happen. And so they'll have options like we talked about, freeing up Trai Turner's $11 million in cap space can allow them to go get a John Feliciano, a Gabe Jackson, a Corey Linsley, somebody that will be, a top tier upgrade, but won't cost as much as a Joe Thuney or a Trent Williams would.
If I'm not mistaken, so Kelechi Osemele, is that who you were saying?
No, Senio Clemente.
Oh, that's a different person with a
different
sounding name.
It's a different person. It's a different person. He was just on the Texans, and they just released him. Yeah.
Okay, never mind then. I was saying Osemele is available, but he tore both his tendons. And then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, isn't Filer a restricted free agent?
I do not know the answer to that question. Let me look.
I wanted him at tackle last year, but he was a restricted free agent. And then I looked
he's unrestricted. He was restricted last year. He's unrestricted.
Then go for it.
Yeah,
and go for it.
And the other one that I think makes a lot of sense is Nick Martin, the center from Houston. He's not as good as a Corey Linsley or a David Andrews, but I think he wouldn't cost as much, and he's been very reliable for Houston. Hasn't had much injury history. He's been kind of the middle of the pack in terms of of grades and pressures and things like that over the last 4 or 5 years. So he's not a flashy offensive lineman signing, but if you want to go get Nick Martin and John Feliciano, I think that is enough of an upgrade for me to be happy. And then you can sign, Matt Filer to, start somewhere in there, or a Kelvin Beachum to start somewhere in there. Bring back Sam Tebby if you want, sign a Nick Easton. They have options. And so they just frankly, they just have to take this offensive line unit and make it average. And if they can make it average, and then next year fill in some more needs through the draft, and then build above average. Obviously I would love it to go from, a worst to top tier, but that's just not realistic. So if they can get enough guys in here to make it average, I think that is enough of an upgrade where I would be happy.
Right. And I think the thing is, you're probably not going to fix all the spots in one off season, right? We've already talked about how they can't cut Balaga, so they can't really work around his injury bug if he does get injured, right? I think, obviously they're cutting Trai Turner. Are they going to replace him at right guard, or are they going to go after center, left guard, left tackle, right? Daniel Popper has been relatively confident that they're going to keep at least one of the three when it comes to Feeney, Tevy, and Lamp. So
right.
I think as long as you can fix, and by fix I mean get the bare minimum offensive line play required at 3 or 4 spots, I think that would be at least a B off season when it comes to the offensive line, which would be welcomed after this year.
Absolutely. And if you replace 4 starters with 4 guys who just get even just 10 less pressures,
right,
that's still 40 less pressures for Justin Herbert. So I think we'll take that.
Yeah, absolutely. They just got to make marginal progress, and that was the hope last year. But I do think that Tom Telesco, he doesn't have a choice, and some people commented after his press conference that he seemed a little agitated, that he seemed, a little what's the word I'm looking for, coarse, I guess, with his remarks, a little given too much attitude, if you will. And I think, he knows that he's got to get this offensive line right. He's got to make some viable progress in a lot of these areas. And I think he knows how much of the 2019 and 18 failures or 2019 and 20, failures were on his shoulders. And, I think he knows that he's got to get this offensive line right.
Yeah. People talked about him being coarse, but also he's kind of getting asked the same questions that he can't answer over and over again, right? He can't tell you what he's going to do in free agency or, the draft or any of these things, because, he's going to keep that under vest because he's Tom Telesco. The only GM right, the only GM in the league who I think, tells you probably what he's going to do beforehand is David Gettleman or something. It was just a hot rod. But, with Telesco, I don't think that he was saying, oh, I don't want to improve the offensive line. I just think he was saying, he said in the January 6th press conference, hey, this offensive line isn't good enough and it needs to be better, right? So I think he definitely wants to improve the offensive line. As far as his offensive line, they're not an offensive line away from contending. I think you could debate that, but to me, if you gave the Chargers, an average or good offensive line, say the Chiefs have, right, would that fix the Chargers, and make them the AFC favorite? No, because the other team has Patrick Mahomes, who's the best quarterback in the league, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's things like that where it's just you definitely want to build up the offensive line this year, but I also don't think you want to set expectations so high to the point where, like last year where we expected a much better offensive line, and then we didn't really get anything because Turner and Balaga were hurt the whole year. So, no, I think he definitely wants to fix the offensive line, but, I don't think he's necessarily going to make any promises about what he's going to do.
No, and he certainly wouldn't do that in his press conference. I watched the press conference on 1.5 speeds, and maybe I just couldn't tell. He didn't seem as agitated as everyone else said, but he's also talking like this. So I don't know. Maybe he was more agitated than I saw, but I don't know. I feel like we've done this song and dance so many times. We've mock draft a first round guy like crazy, or sign this or whatever, and only to have it be Jerry Tillery, and then Justin Herbert, but that worked out okay.
Yeah.
But overall, it's been 9 years or 8 years, whatever it's been. So just show me. As long as they get 2 guys, been saying it, they get 2 guys as upgrades, fine by me. Good offseason for the line.
Right. I think I would have a different take if if he signed all the free agents and then came out all nonchalant, like, what the hell do you want me to say? Right. But like,
Yeah.
he hasn't signed anybody yet and he hasn't done anything in the offseason. So other than sign some Bengals kicker or whatever. So it's hard to really make a judgment, about, what his moves are and explaining his motives when, he hasn't done anything. So that's just my takeaway from that press conference mostly.
Yeah, and this is what he is. We just saw him pull off the most secretive coaching search in modern NFL history. Like, there wasn't even tweets of like, we interviewed so and so that everybody else was doing. It was just like, okay, like what's going on here? And then it was like, all right, here's Brandon Staley, their new head coach. So, we're not going to know anything from the Chargers until they actually confirm it. And that's why I always think it's so funny when I still to this day will see people retweet NFL rums or NFL other rumor accounts, and it's like, you guys, like, it's not happening. Like, we don't know anything right now. The only thing that we have confirmed is that they're trying to shop Trai Turner and that Denzel Perryman is testing the market. And even that, like, Adam Schefter reported that Brian Dable was going to be the head coach. And so it's like, assume you knew nothing until something is confirmed. And that's the only way to go about things with Tom Telesco.
Right. And, Adam Schefter is a great reporter. So, like, the fact that 36 hours before Staley happened, he was saying his sources were telling him something completely different, right? Like, that's just kind of how the Chargers have operated. They've always been setting smoke screens and doing what everyone doesn't expect them to do. So, or at least positioning themselves that way. So, I wouldn't believe any of the rumors out there until they're confirmed for sure.
It's such a pet peeve of mine for these accounts to say, oh, I heard this. And we were a fan base at one point who thought that Ndamukong Suh was signing with the Chargers because he attended a gas station in Costa Mesa or whatever. Hey, listen, my sister's boyfriend sent me a picture the other day of Matt Ryan at a gas station, like 10 minutes from my house. He's not playing for the Chargers next year. He's not playing for the Ram next year. Believe it or not, guys. I mean, there was that rumor that, Saleh was signing with the Lions because of a cake and the blue icing that was used on that cake. Like, give me a fucking break, guys. And listen, yeah, like you said about Adam Schefter, there was someone who told me last year who has a source. I don't pretend to even, never forget it. Point is, they said, don't even worry about Justin Herbert. They're not going to take him. And they took Justin Herbert. So, won't say who it is, but even the people that maybe even trust a little bit more are wrong. And so, because Adam Schefter was wrong. We're all wrong. So just sit here, enjoy it when it happens. When they don't take an offensive tackle, it's because Tom Telesco doesn't care, and he'll let the media hear whatever they want to hear.
Yeah, he doesn't. And hey, you guys, just in case you missed it, Justin Herbert was golfing with Nick DeZubnar the other day. So he's coming back. Actually, I wouldn't even mind that because
someone's got to
the special teams are so bad.
That too.
But yeah, so the Tom Telesco press conference, we've hit on it and we mentioned it yesterday. There's not a whole lot to take away from it that we haven't mentioned. But Alex, did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up here?
Yeah, I just thought the two interesting things really were the Hunter Henry comments, right? Where he just kind of said, like, we're going to, we're open to making a deal and we want to make a deal, but, we can't sign all of our free agents, right? Which kind of led to the, inclination that he may not overpay for Hunter Henry, right? And I think we're pretty safe in terms of the territory. I don't think he's going to use the franchise tag within the next 2 days on Hunter Henry. So I think it's either going to be free agency or bust this year. And I don't know if I think that Tom Telesco was frustrated throughout the whole press conference, but when Daniel Popper did ask the question about the secondary, he was kind of actively like, what do you want me to say? With Michael Davis's free agency, obviously. And, that kind of, I really got the spark going in terms of like, is Casey Hayward going to get cut? Is Chris Harris going to get cut? Are they both going to get cut? I've thought for most of the offseason that Casey Hayward's probably gone and that Chris Harris is safe because of the coaching staff. But like, I really don't know anymore. I'm not sure who's safe and who's not, especially in the secondary, other than I think Michael Davis will be back. Those are the only other two things that really stood out to me. I don't know if any other things stood out to you guys.
Nothing in particular that we haven't already talked about. The only thing being that Telesco knows that some of the guys they brought in on this coaching staff or the staff overall do have connections to some of these guys in the draft this year. So you look at Iowa, you look at Northwestern, you look at Pittsburgh, and some of these, try to piece some prospects together to figure out, who do these guys know? Where did you work before? So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Whether it's just information to not draft these guys, I don't know, but we'll see. I'm really curious to see how this plays out because they did purposefully take a lot of guys from different backgrounds from the college ranks kind of for this purpose, not only for this purpose, but it's certainly a huge benefit to them to be able to have this extra intel on these guys. So we'll see if it pays off.
So we got Northwestern, Iowa, and now Notre Dame still.
As well, Notre Dame, and there's the assistant coach came over from Clemson, and then the secondary coach, I forget his name right now. He was the defensive coordinator at Tennessee, and then the wide receivers coach used to coach at Pittsburgh. So they'll have some connections all over the place, and I think that really is invaluable in terms of this season. Just because even if you're not taking someone from those schools, those coaches will have connections at other schools that they can ask about. Like somebody from Pittsburgh can reach out to somebody from Miami and ask about Greg Rousseau or Jalen Phillips or Quincy Roche and things like that, because they have those connections. And so it's going to be interesting. The franchise tag, we still haven't heard what the salary cap is at, which it was supposed to happen on Friday. The franchise tag deadline is Tuesday, and we still haven't heard about it. But I don't think that he's going to tag Hunter Henry. I think this might be too much speculation, but from my perspective, it feels like he thinks that another franchise tag would be overpaying for Hunter Henry. And I think that's a reasonable statement or idea for him to make, because Hunter Henry, he's very solid. He's very well-rounded, but are you really going to pay him, $13 million on the franchise tag? That's a little rich for my taste. I think he's worth 10 or $11 million, but franchise tagging him for 2 years in a row, that might be something that Telesco just, he said he's not going to rule it out, but I think the fact that he hasn't done it yet shows that either he's willing to let Henry test the market, or he knows that, or he's comfortable with, where that dialogue is headed with Hunter Henry.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's a lot of, I don't think there's been any franchise tags handed out yet. So I think there's a lot of teams waiting to that deadline, seeing if they get an extension, right? Dak with the Cowboys, which has been going on for like 5 years, as well as a bunch of other franchise tag possibilities. Chris Godwin in Tampa. But it's going to be interesting all around. And I did get into a little bit of trouble over Twitter because I said Michael Davis is the more important signing than Hunter Henry. So yeah, that's really all I got on my end.
Yeah, well, Justin Simmons and Taylor Moton, those two were franchise tagged on Friday,
right?
Which doesn't help the Chargers.
No, it doesn't. But somebody pegged Taylor Moton as a potential target. I want to say it was somebody from Chargers Wire or something like that.
For left tackle.
At left tackle, yeah. But Moton, he was never going to leave. And that's the thing, is we need to look at these players. Teams don't let young, really good offensive tackles leave unless they ask for a trade, which is what's happening with Orlando Brown. And they still might be able to work something out there. I don't really know. But Taylor Moton was never going to leave. And so if you see somebody who's still 25, 26, kind of just assume that they're not going anywhere unless, it's confirmed that they are going to be. So, I don't know, man. The franchise tag, I don't see it as an option for Hunter Henry. If it were, I think we probably would have seen it happen already.
Yeah, and that 25, 26-year-old thing, that's also by thinking on Michael Davis, right? When you have a young corner like that, you don't let him walk. So yeah, that was just kind of my thinking on that.
Cool. That's it for me.
Cool. Well, they do have I feel like they have better options of replacing Henry than they do in terms of free agency.
Yeah.
Than they do with Michael Davis, because again, the cornerback market, it's possible that you could get a Troy Hill to come over, or a Shaq Griffin from the Seahawks, but in terms of a young high quality corner, those two that's it. William Jackson is a little younger, but he's not I don't think he has as high of a ceiling. So I just don't really feel like they have a choice with Michael Davis. You can't let your youngest and best corner walk. You have to keep that guy around. It just doesn't make any sense to me to let him, test the market. Just re-sign him, do it now. And I think it's a very similar conversation to what we were talking about with Austin Eckler last year, right? Like you can't let a pass catching running back who's young and has the best football ahead of him leave. And it's the same thing with Michael Davis.
Right. And you've seen Michael Davis develop, all through these years. And if you have him on a 3 or 4 year deal, you might be getting, top 10 CB1 play at some point for $7 or $8 million per year. Right. And that's just a market inefficiency to exploit.
Yeah, there's a good floor for both Henry and Davis, and they could probably do better next year. And you'd be, getting more of your money's worth. What am I trying to say? I don't know, dude.
Well, they could get him on a similar deal for like what they had Casey Hayward.
There you go.
And that's one of the biggest bargain contracts that we've seen in recent history. And obviously, different situation with Keenan Allen, but he was younger and still had the best football ahead of him. And obviously, the injuries played a huge part in that contract, but if you get a young player who's still on the come up, you got to keep him around and just at least see what you have in him for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think Keenan Allen is still only going to make less than $1 million more than Mike Williams this season.
Oh gosh. Someone asked us on the live stream, like, why isn't cutting Mike Williams more talked about? Or, Tom Telesco did talk about a possible extension with him. Has any of your guys' thoughts changed about him? I personally still feel like it's the most likely option is that he plays on the $15 million tag, and then hits free agency next year. But do either of you feel differently after hearing Telesco's press conference?
So I think the thing is that they can't technically cut him. What they would have to do is, because he hasn't signed the 5th-year option yet, so they would have to rescind it. I'm not 100% sure that's the case, but you just don't see teams rescind 5th-year options very often. Once it's given, it's kind of given. And they did that last year. I just don't know if he has much of a reason to sign an extension. Like if you're the Chargers and you can get him for $10 million a year, that'd be great. But if Mike Williams goes off this year and he has 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, that's going to put him on the market next year for probably $14-15 million deal.
Yep.
Right. Especially coming into next year where there's going to be a bunch of money on the table compared to this year with the whole pandemic. So that's it just doesn't make sense for him. Even if he's banged up for a couple games this year, and let's say he has a similar season to this year, 800 yards and 5 touchdowns, like the lowest his salary could probably go is like 10 million. So, there's not much, other than if he was really afraid of having a season ending injury, there isn't much reason for him to sign 10-11 million when he can get a lot more than that if he balls out this year.
That's a good call. I didn't think of that. I think at this point the Chargers have made their big cut. I believe Trai Turner is gone. If things were tighter and they wanted to keep Turner and maybe Hayward and Joseph or whatever they want to do, then maybe they would rescind that. And if they deem someone else more important. But they've cut Turner kind of for this reason, not specifically just to keep Mike Williams around, but to make sure that they have enough room to keep him around. And I think he's going to play on this last year and see how it goes. It makes sense for him, makes sense for the Chargers. So
yeah. And it would be one thing if they were in like the Saints situation where they have to do all these different things to cut money and get under the salary cap floor. But I think his contract for this year, like they'll essentially view it as the franchise tag and look at it as we have this 1-year deal. We'll take it as a prove it deal. And it stands within reason if Hunter Henry leaves that Mike Williams takes on a much, much larger role for this team. And in that case, like Alex mentioned, we could see him get 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns and then cost way too much for the Chargers to bring back anyway. And so I think Mike Williams' future is the most up in the air of anyone else in terms of like future deals, just because, if he plays super, super well, the Chargers can't afford him. And if he doesn't play very well, then maybe they shouldn't bring him back. So, it kind of sucks, but, foreshadowing ahead right now, it just doesn't seem like Mike Williams is going to be on the Chargers past 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ways where he could be on this team past 2021. If he has a decent year, kind of like this one, but not great, I think that's a situation where you can pay him money to still be your wide receiver too, even though his market's not going to be nearly as high as a season where he kind of balled out would be. I still think he does have some value on this team, but also Absolutely. If you do let Mike Williams walk, then what are you replacing him with, right? Are you going to go sign another free agent, right? This is kind of the problem is like, okay, if you let Mike Williams walk this year, you have to go sign someone in free agency or draft someone really high, right? Just to be that wide receiver 2 for somewhat the foreseeable future. So that could mean, I guess, signing Corey Davis for 10 plus million, or, going out and drafting a wide receiver in the first or second round. So, and I don't think that's something that any of us really want to do, because I think the problem just with the idea of cutting Mike Williams or getting that 15 million off the board is you have to replace it with something else, and then you're using other assets to replace the money that was already on the table.
Well, you don't want to see Jalen Guyton go down the sideline for a jump ball, 50-50
Jesus
ball in the end zone.
Christ, no.
While I do think Williams is limited, watching him play in some of the games last season, he just kind of runs wind sprints for the team, doesn't do a whole lot. And granted, that's partially because he can't do a whole lot, but I would like to see 1 year with him with someone creative. And Staley has mentioned, wanting to get these guys involved. He did name drop Mike Williams. So we'll see how they involve him, if they can evolve him at all.
Right. Well, and the biggest thing that I've been saying is like, he didn't really have much of a relationship with Justin Herbert last year, right? Like his relationship was, Phillip Rivers saying, hey, go down the field and I'll throw it to you with 3 defenders on you, right? And then this year, he comes in with Justin Herbert starts playing on the second string unit, and he has Guyton and all these guys, Johnson. Those were the guys he kind of got close with, Hunter Henry a little bit as well. And then, Keenan Allen obviously is a, yards per catch and receptions magnet. So that gets you targets taken away. So then Mike Williams is kind of in this no man's land. And that is, I think, something that happened to him last year, where it's like Justin Herbert is going to uncork the deep ball, but not quite as often as Phillip Rivers did yet, right? I think Phillip Rivers threw 7.8 yards per attempt in 2019, and then Herbert last year was 7.3. So that is like a significant difference that does add up over time.
Yeah, and like I said, Tom Telesco mentioned this too. There's only so many targets for each player, and I could kind of see him rationalizing, okay, we can let Hunter Henry walk because we can let Mike Williams do more things over the middle and more things in the red zone, and that's the thing, is that we all expect this Chargers offense to be more efficient in 2021. And that should benefit Mike Williams. It should benefit Keenan Allen. It should benefit Hunter Henry if he's back, and Austin Eckler. But, I could see the thought process of like, well, we don't necessarily need a top tier tight end because we have 2 really good receivers on each side. We have a pass catching running back, and we have these burners that we could do. So, I think Mike Williams, his numbers should increase just by sheer efficiency of the offense. And also, like Alex mentioned, he's going to have a full offseason with Justin Herbert and vice versa. And Justin should be able to get more comfortable with him. And I do think it will be at least somewhat more productive than what he was last year if he's able to stay healthy. And he showed it in the games that Keenan Allen left early that he can be capable of being a wide receiver 1 in terms of, being that vertical threat and things like that. So it stands to reason that he does improve. It's just,
right,
how are they able to afford him if he does have a great season, or if he doesn't have a good season and he's injured again, do they want to keep him around? So it's just a lot of question marks, and we'll see how it irons out, but just something to keep an eye on, I think.
I think it's also a philosophy question too, because we've seen Daniel Popper and a lot of other people, talk about how the Chargers view this offense as touches, right? They don't really view it as like, this guy has to get this many and this guy has to get this many. It's just, so that's why I think when it comes to yards and stuff like that, I don't think the Chargers look at it like, oh, Mike Williams only had 750 yards and Hunter Henry only had 600, right? I think they just view it as, hey, how many catches did this guy have? And how many, touches did he have on the season, and what did he do with those, right? And if you compare 2019 to 2020, Mike Williams only had 1 fewer catch. It's just that they were, 5 fewer yards per attempt. So that, that might explain kind of the philosophical, I guess, difference in how the Chargers approach offense a little bit.
That's an interesting way to look at it, for sure. I also think, Telesco needs to keep Williams on the team for the same reason he needs to drop offensive linemen. You better prove that this pick worked, and this is probably your last year to prove that this worked. Because in all honesty, you probably drafted Mike Williams over Patrick Mahomes and, Deshaun Watson, which is awful. And this, you could argue that this is his worst pick. So you need to make it work this year to kind of save your butt as well. So, I think he's sticking around.
Yeah, that's an
And
interesting.
Mike Williams over Patrick Mahomes is a hell of a sentence.
And
Well,
Deshaun Watson.
and Deshaun Watson
And Christian McCaffrey.
Oh man,
And the other 4 Pro Bowlers that came after him.
Oh man, that's an interesting legacy conversation, because obviously Mike Williams could still pan out and improve and be a very productive NFL player, but that's an interesting thing to talk about in terms of Tom Telesco's legacy. And I don't know, man. Obviously, I'm very happy with Justin Herbert, right?
Right.
But I think we were all kind of thinking that at some point they would have to draft somebody to be that heir apparent to Philip Rivers, and it turned out that they just waited a little too long to see Philip Rivers decline so much in 2019.
We might have also gotten Patrick Mahomes killed behind the offensive line anyway, so that's another issue with
the
this
Super Bowl for
conversation.
16 games, though.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, I was talking with the Tua thing with somebody on Twitter the other day, and they're like, "Oh, I wonder how things would pan out right now if the Dolphins had taken Justin Herbert and the Chargers had Tua." And I was like, "Well, the thing I do know is that the Chargers offensive line would have gotten Tua murdered, because Tua can't escape like Justin can." So
right. And we're about to see him go to Houston, perhaps. So he'll get killed anyway.
Oh gosh, man, that's gonna be wild. The Texans have to trade Watson. This is kind of tangent, but them waiting to trade Watson until after the draft would just be so stupid, because it's not going to get any better. The situation is not going away. Deshaun Watson is not going to want to play for them, and so that obviously would have major draft ramifications if the Texans were able to get at that number 3 pick, which they should have anyway. Yeah. The thing is just a mess, man.
Also, the other thing with that is, like, can we talk about how a Russell Wilson trade has just magically progressed faster than the Deshaun Watson trade?
I know.
Like, it's just, people are like, hey, they're picking up phone calls and the Texans are letting them go to voicemail. I'm like, what? Like, the fact that they're not willing to let this thing work out with Russell Wilson that's crazy.
It is crazy, man.
Thanks for your guys' input on that one.
Well, you froze up there for a second.
You're currently drinking water, and I can hear your audio of you speaking. That's how long. So that's where we're at.
That is where we're at. So we'll leave it there. We'll talk about Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson on our own time, because this is a Chargers podcast. So thank you guys for tuning in today. We will hopefully be able to talk about some more established news on Wednesday with free agency cuts coming up. We are officially, I think, 10 days away from the start of free agency. Is that right? As we're recording this. So
sure.
Going to be a crazy few weeks, and we're super excited about that. Got some fun things planned for you guys as well. Make sure, if you're listening to us on YouTube, to like and subscribe to our channel, set those notifications. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, please leave us a rating and review. We do really appreciate that. And like I said, thank you for your support, and we will see you guys next time.